Good morning, afternoon, or evening, or night, or whatever you are, wherever you are. Hello, and welcome to another episode of my Terminal Directive Cards, a new series where I one up myself on what I previously did, which was pack reviews. Instead, I'm going to look at Terminal Directive Cards, card by card in each episode. And instead of just theoretical discussion, we have practical analysis as well as a guide on how to deck build around said cards. Today's featured card is none other than Elective Upgrade. This is a 5/3 HB agenda, and ability is basically gives you two Baltic labels, which can only be used once per turn. So when you look at this at first glance, the combo seems very obvious. Score this Elective Upgrade first, and then draw into an ABT and fast advance it, putting you on 5 points. Then draw into a Vitruvius, fast advance it, puts you on 7 points, which immediately wins you the game. Yeah, it's a very ideal scenario, but realistically, that's how you want to play it, because that basically means elective upgrade reads as soon as you score it, you win the game. Because unless they can lock your R&D or stop you from drawing your agendas or stop you from fast advancing, you are pretty much all clear to fast advance your way to victory, and that's really powerful. As such, this is actually one of the most powerful non-defensive 5/3 agendas in the game. But is it good enough to be played? That's the real question. But one thing's for sure, this one has a pretty interesting theme. Thematically, you are in the Android universe and you're like, okay, so there's this upgrade available. It's not a mandatory thing. It's not necessary by any means, but I want to service myself with it. I want this upgrade to become better, faster, tougher, stronger. And this actually translates very well into the game itself. Mechanically, you want to proactively score this agenda. This is not an agenda you want to sit back with, wait until you're completely set up and then attempt to go score it. This is an agenda you want to be very aggressive with. Otherwise, you might as well play the other HB agendas or neutral agendas that are, support a passive style of play. Agendas like beta test and Vitruvius, which you never advance, which are easier to score, or agendas like global food that give you no advantage when scored, but defend your deck better. If you are looking for that sort of deck, Elective Upgrade is not for you. You want to be proactive. You want to say, hey, I want an agenda that snowballs me into winning the game, and Elective Upgrade does exactly that. Moreover, you want to win before the runners steal 3 agendas. Nowadays, there are lots of runners that have a lot of ways to pressure you, get lots of accesses, and win quickly. Being a 5/3 agenda, it has the big liability that it allows runners to potentially win on 3 agenda steals, and that is a huge downside, and which is why you don't see a lot of non-defensive 5/3s running around nowadays. As such, you want to win early before the runner even has a shot of setting up their big medium digs or their big keyhole runs to steal those 3 agendas. All this translates into one simple objective. You want to rush. As said, you don't want to dawdle on and score this late. Neither do you want it to be your final agenda. You need to score Elective Upgrade first in every single game, pretty much. So, let's reiterate. What's the objective if you're building around Elective Upgrade? Step 1, score it ASAP. Step 2, that's not really a step 2. That's it. All we need to do is to keep in mind that we need to score the Elective Upgrade early and build around that. So, how do we do that? This is actually quite tricky. There are lots of, you can only include 3 copies of Elective Upgrade in your deck. Therefore, you're constrained by the fact that in some games you just won't draw the Elective Upgrade, and you can't have that happen. You need to reliably draw Elective Upgrade every game, score it early, and then snowball your way to 7 points. Fast Track is one way which does this. It only tutors agendas, but that's exactly what we need. The problem is, I don't think that's a good way to do things, because unlike where else you would see Fast Track, which is in Palana, for example, in Palana, the agenda in concern is a 4/2 agenda, Nisei Mark 2. You can Fast Track Nisei, install Nisei, and advance Nisei all in the same turn. You cannot do that with Elective Upgrade. You would need another combo card, something like a Biotic Label, that allows you to fast track, install, advance, and on the next turn, you can advance 4 times to score the Elective Upgrade. So this makes fast track very clunky and a lot worse. Fast track is ideal on 4/2 agendas, not 5/3s. The other thing you can do is to increase the consistency of seeing Elective Upgrade by increasing the number of copies of it in your deck. While it is not a 6-off, unlike consumer-grade hardware, you can still play 6-off essentially by doubling up on cards that essentially serve the same purpose, Efficiency Committee. So Efficiency does basically the same thing as Elective Upgrade, but requires shipment to use those clicks to fast advance. And that seems like a pretty viable plan. The trouble is, if you're on the fast advance plan, what you want to do is to maximize the number of 3-2s in your deck. You want to play all the Vitruviuses and all the beta tests. But if you're already running 6 copies, 3 electives and 3 efficiencies, there's no... I mean, you're gonna bust the agenda limit, so this is a no-go either. We're left with the final option, which is what most CI decks actually do. Most CI decks are reliant on scoring an efficiency committee as their first agenda, and then snowballing to 7 points that way. And how do they make sure they see the efficiency committee? They draw lots. They draw with violets, and on the screen you see here, ultraviolet clearance. The excessive card draw is what they need to reliably see efficiency committee in every single game. And this is the technique we are going to use with Elective Upgrade as well. So, here are the things you want to keep in mind when trying to build around Elective Upgrade, and I'll give you a chance to do that right now. I've explained the kind of deck you want to play Elective Upgrade in, a rush scoring deck, and why I'm going to give you the opportunity to have a go at it yourself. Here are some points to keep in mind on the PowerPoint slide as you build your deck. You can pause the video now. You want to consider the agenda suite, the con and draw engine. You want to consider the ice that stops them from stealing your install advanced elective upgrades, and you want to have a second line of defense in case they do manage to breach your remote early on. Perhaps they're running fouls, a very good remote breaker, or something like a self-modifying code that gets them in reliably. How do you defend your install advanced elective upgrades? These are the points to think about. Go pause the video, and I urge you to try building this deck for yourself. We'll compare decks after the playthrough. So I'll see you then. For those of you watching retroactively, this was played during a time where HB asset spam was prevalent. As such, I spotted that I could masquerade as a HB asset spam deck by making this opening, which is very reminiscent of what an asset spam deck would do. 2 assets and an ice to defend against Siphon. So this forces my opponent to go on the offensive to check, and I show them the advanced assembly lines. They dirty laundry the right one. They want to kill my lines because I put the lines out there unres so that if my opponent decided to direct Temujin at any server, I would be able to block that with advanced lines into Turing. This is a very powerful play against Temujin contract. Thankfully for me, my opponent did not start with Temujin in their opening hand, so they're going to struggle quite a bit. In the meantime, I'm just going to continue playing off as asset spam because I could, and because I have Jeeves online. With Jeeves, it has incentivized me to install 3 cards. So I installed Caprice behind the Turing. I installed a second Jeeves, which my opponent trashed the first off, but couldn't afford to trash the second off. And this gives me an extra click on my last turn. And instead of clicking for a credit as most people would have done, I click to draw. This deck is very reliant on drawing. As I mentioned earlier in the explanation video, you want to draw lots of cards until you find your elective upgrade. So every spare click I have is spent drawing, because I know full well that the rest of my deck is full of econ cards, like Ultraviolet that I just played. I couldn't use Ultraviolet with the effect of Jeeves for an extra click because my opponent smartly trashed my other Jeeves, and I did not have enough money to res the current Jeeves in server 4 and play Ultraviolet. I was 1 credit short, so annoying. So my opponent actually made a very wise choice in trashing that first Jeeves. Anyway, I continue on, and as you can see, my economy is basically settled. The only problem is defending my remote and actually finding, the elective upgrade. My econ is very solid because I just play an IPO. My remotes is a bit troubling because all I have is Turing to Caprice. I would like to have a second ice on the remote. I could have installed the HQ ice, the second HQ ice on the remote, but it was a Nyx bronze. Bronze into Turing, 2 of the same types of ice, is not ideal. So here I use Jackson to reshuffle, most importantly, the violet level clearance back into my deck so that I can... Ultraviolet, sorry. So that I have a greater chance of finding the Ultraviolet, which draws me more cards. To spend 3 clicks to draw 4 cards is a very good prospect for me. I was hoping I would find a Violet, but I did not. So I did the next best thing, which was using the Jeeves ability. I mean, I drew 3 cards on my turn with 3 clicks. That triggers G's ability. So you can see I'm just drawing so frantically here. My second turn of spending lots of clicks to draw in a row. This is the amount of digging I need. I needed to dig through like basically half my deck by turn 6 in order to find my first elective upgrade. So I finally have found it, and I have a suitable HQ defense such that I'm not worried about my opponent coming into HQ and stealing my elective upgrade. My opponent's taking a very long time to set up here. All they have is a refractor out. They've already shown that they're stealth, so they've shown the silencer, which is why you see all the architects in the bin. These are not going to tax my opponent out, so I'm not going to even bother installing them. So Itchies and Architects are irrelevant in this matchup. I'm going to tax my opponent out. Knowing the standard Stealth Breaker suite, I know the barriers are going to be the most taxing. Nyx Silvers and Eli's are the way to go, which is why you see my hand is flooded with all the barriers. I know that's my means of taxing the runner out. Now my opponent makes a very huge mistake here. They ignore my remote completely. With Refractor and Switchblade, they really should be checking it. Sure, sentries will be a pain, but against HB, you really have got to, because now I've scored the elective upgrades, and this puts a massive pressure on my opponent, and they're going to start making misplays that they wouldn't otherwise make. Because now they're forced to run my R&D and HQ very aggressively, otherwise I'm just going to chain agendas and score into the win. Now, my opponent doesn't pressure HQ here, instead they go for R&D multiple times. I'm not going to see much. But the big question for me is, do I score the ABT right now? It seems like R&D is a bit porous, only 1 Nyx dice there. It seems like it could use some shoring up. So knowing that my opponent still doesn't have their Corroder or Paperclip, I feel safe in keeping HQ defended. That Nyx Silver is going to be 3 to break if my opponent runs HQ. So I'm happy with letting my opponent get 1 more turn off before scoring this ABT from my hand. I don't want to score the ABT too early, because even though this is a rush deck, I'm up against a similarly rushy criminal. And this is bad news for me, because if I score an agenda too early, I power up the Aaron Marin, and this could be bad news bears for me, because that opens up easy siphoning, or draws them into the tools they need. So I'm very wary of that. My mandatory draw dictates what I do here. Scoring ABT would have been a very viable option, but I drew into a friends. So I'm like, okay, my opponent helped me trash a Chrysium from R&D. Let's reinstall it with friends. And so it was reinstalled. I also install advanced assembly lines there, purely as econ, to make up for the fact that friends cost 2 to play. So this is huge for me. I do not want my opponent to get a free siphon or legwork off. This is why I need a Chrysium on HQ. And this is costing my opponent terrible tempo to try to trash. They know they need to contest HQ, otherwise their siphons and legworks are blank. Unfortunately, my opponent chose not to continue on past the next bronze, seeing that there's more and more next dice stacking up. And now that my opponent has shown the Corroder, I know I need to score the ABT now before my opponent gets it. So it's going out of my hand right now. I'm not gonna trigger ABT. I'm well ahead of the game. I do not need the extra help from ABT, extra ice. So this is when my opponent has to just start running crazily every single server, because I could very well win next turn. The win's on the line, and yeah, it all comes back to the fact that they did not contest elective upgrades earlier. Playing a very passive style game where my opponent was like, I'm not going to run at all until I'm completely set up with all my breakers, and that's the punishment. If I can proactively score a very powerful agenda like elective upgrades, it is very difficult for the runner to come back at this point. But they have one last key weapon against me. A turning wheel with 6 counters and 1 click left. Right now I'm fearing my opponent running R&D again. They have a Temujin Director on R&D. This would be a very good time to run again and see 3 extra cards. They know the top card's not on the agenda, but the next 3 might be. And this could easily lead them to match point if they find another copy of Elective upgrades. That's the downside to running a 5-3 in my deck. But thankfully, my opponent goes for the completely wrong server. There are no agendas at all in HQ. Even though my opponent can see all 4 cards in my hand, that's not going to help them. So, turning wheel, expended, and we see nothing of use. My opponent can trash the Chrysium from HQ, but that would completely cripple the economy, which is why I didn't even bothering raising the Chrysium here, also because they can't install Pollock. My opponent saw the Ultraviolet of R&D. So here I argue that my opponent made a big mistake by not rerunning R&D, because now that I get to play the Ultraviolet, you know I would play it in that situation. Now my opponent needs to run HQ because I just drew 4 fresh cards, many of which could be agendas. But they can't run HQ now. They are on 0 credits after trashing the Chrysium. They have 0 or 1 turning wheel counter. They can't sweep my hand. So basically I'm assured to win at this point. All I need to do is to wait for my opponent to do something and then fast advance an agenda from my hand. So yeah, if my opponent actually attempted to contest my remote, I would be forced to rest more ice. I wouldn't be able to score my agendas that easily. Another point I failed to mention earlier when I was scoring the elective upgrades was that the outermost ice of the remote was a Mother Goddess. Because my opponent was playing so passively on my centrals, I knew that the first elective upgrades would be scored very easily because my opponent had no way of breaking a Mother Goddess without any subtypes other than Mythic. As you can probably tell, the Mother Goddess is a one-off in my deck just to power up the next ice suite, but it gave me double assurance that without AI breakers, which Stealth Andy typically doesn't run, I didn't even have to rely on Caprice side games to score the elective upgrades. The Mother Goddess single-handedly allowed me to jam that elective upgrades with much ease. Speaking of next ice, I am sporting the next ice suite right here, and the reasons are twofold. Firstly, in a rush deck, you need to have cheap ice because you want to rush agendas, and advancing the elective upgrade is very resource intensive. It's 5-3 after all. Therefore, you do want to save money on resing ice. Secondly, because you are looking for gear checks, you want to stop the runner from getting in early to mid game, so gear checks are the most suitable. And yeah, Bioroid Ice don't necessarily end the run, but next Silver and Bronze sure do. Next, we look at what happens when the runner breaches through my ice if they have a breaker like Faust that can get into my remote. The next most reliable way to keep the elective upgrade safe has to be Caprice Nisei. I mean, already 5-3s don't see a lot of play at all, and the main reason is because there's just no easy way to score them. Caprice is really the only realistic way which you're going to score 5-3 with. And Chrysium is there to back that up. In case of runners who spot the Polop, which is a very common counter card, at least with a Chrysium on HQ, they cannot simply just run HQ and then run the remote to trash Caprice and then fetch your agenda. Finally, we look at what complements Ultraviolet Clearance, which is the premier draw card of choice. I've been rather lukewarm in terms of saying that Ultraviolet's good, but I'm starting to think that Ultraviolet is pretty decent. I might do a Terminal Directive card video on Ultraviolet someday, but in any case, you do want to pair it with G's Model Bioroids because you get that sweet extra click which helps you to empty your hand after drawing 4 cards. Advanced Assembly Lines is another good way to synergize with Ultraviolet because if you draw into it or if you have it in hand, that could be your install for Ultraviolet, which then allows you to install another card from your hand before discarding down to max hand size. Often this is one of the biggest limitations of running Ultraviolet. It's that you flood your hand, you have to discard a lot of cards. It's not a worry if you're running Jeeves or Advanced Assembly Lines in complement with Jackson Howard. So there you go. This is the deck list. How close or how far is your deck list from this? Post it in the comment section. I'd like to hear from you and how you went around building your deck according to the principles that I laid out earlier. But one thing's for sure, I think a lot of your decks, I suspect, that run a certain operation that I don't. That's right, it's Biotic Labor. You notice that I don't have Biotic in my deck at all. This just shows you how all in I am on the elective upgrade. Pretty much this whole deck is all or nothing. Either I get the elective upgrade going or I'm pretty much screwed. I'm forced to rely on Caprice side games to score all my agendas. And this honestly probably isn't a wise idea nowadays. With so many different runner counter strategies around, you do need some sort of dual win condition of sorts. Like 2 different kinds of cards that help you score agendas. If you're just all in on elective upgrade to get you from 0 to 7, good luck with that. That being said, I've been thinking about it, and turns out there are not that many not that many counters in the card pool to elective upgrade. By far the hardest counter is Turntable for sure. Turntable makes running this agenda a complete nightmare. You'll always be on your toes because the moment the runner steals an agenda, even if it's another elective upgrade, there go your tokens, and every agenda token on elective upgrade is basically worth 2 agenda points to you due to the fast advance capability. This is a really nasty hard counter, and it's probably one reason why you won't see too many elective upgrades out in the wild. Secondly, another good counter is Clot or the Source. Anything that stops fast advance makes things just a bit more difficult. You now have to never advance agendas in the remote, and this could end up being vulnerable, especially if they have hate cards for Caprice as well. So I guess having a dual win condition of sorts in this deck is kind of nice. You have the fast advance option from Elective Upgrade, and that kind of hinges on scoring it in the first place, which is done with Caprice. Finally, the one thing that will hurt Elective Upgrade the most, in my opinion, is actually not a card in the card pool, but rather its rotation. Rotation is going to remove Caprice Nisei, meaning that there's no longer any easy way to score this agenda at all. I don't think you can build a deck around scoring an Elective Upgrade without Caprice Nisei. Moreover, rotation removes Vitruvius from the card pool as well, which means that you will only have 3 3/2 agendas to fast advance. That's a lot worse. Arguably, you can bring in Merger to shore this up, but that would be influence spent. Not ideal either. So yes, enjoy Elective Upgrade while you can, because I think in 4 or 5 months time, post-rotation, this agenda is going to be a lot less effective than it is now. Which is kind of sad, because you really want to see an effective 5/3 out in the wild. But, well, that's what rotation does. Enjoy. Thanks for watching and happy net running. I'll see you next time.